Hi guys, and welcome back. This is the Metal Roast Review. It has been a hot minute since I've done one of these, but as you can see, things have changed a bit. New setting, new lighting. I got a blazer.
New man.
This is true professionalism at its finest. And to mark this return to form, we are looking at the latest blend from the band Kataklysm, which is called Unconquered. So a quick disclaimer, this is my first venture into the Kataklysm discography. However, I did look at some of their previous work as well, and yeah, it's absolutely fucking brutal. And with what they bring to the table here, really pushes them to the next level in the case of the death metal scene. So as a first impression, it's pretty solid. And what's amazing about this band as well, that with the sound they're bringing, the quality of riffs, the writing on it, and what is outstanding about this band is, even though they're an older band, they have put out an album that easily competes with anything that's coming out today, whether it be deathcore, death metal, anything, which kind of shows that, yes, you can teach an old dog new tricks, and they're amazing. But anyway, let's jump into this album. So this album starts off with the opening track called Kill Shot, which starts off with clean guitars. It has a bit of atmosphere, setting the scene, and then goes straight into absolute chugging, blast beats, insanity. So opening tracks in general act as sort of the overture for the album. It sets the scene. It sort of gives you the vibe as a whole of what the album is going to be bringing to the table. So with this opening track, it gives heaviness, brutality, insanity. And with this opening track, it gives the vibe of bands such as Lamb of God, Decapitated, that really uber chuggy heaviness. And it's really exemplified with the use of the guitars on this album, which for the first time, this band is actually using 7-string guitars, which adds so much more heaviness that I was not expecting, because I was listening to a couple of their older stuff and it was heavy. Don't get me wrong, it was fucking brutal. But with the 7 strings and everything else on top of it, it just pushed it to the next level. It was insane. It's fucking brutal. Now, the thing is also with opening tracks, if you put all your good stuff on that opening track, you do end up in a situation where it can pale in comparison to everything else on the album, which can result in a situation where you start up here at a peak and then you end up just going slowly downhill. Yeah, and for this album, the opening track starts off at a strong 100%, no holds barred, really showing you what this album has to offer. So after that insane start to the album, could this band keep it up? Well, they did, with the second track, Cut Me Down, which goes for the more melodic death metal vibe that's very reminiscent of bands such as At the Gates. And frankly, if you're going to write a track that's a melodic track and you're sort of using like At the Gates as an inspiration, that is all right with me. There's nothing wrong with having an At the Gates style song in your album. They're a great band, might as well use their influence on this one. Moving on, we have the track Underneath the Scars. And one thing I do really like about this track that really exemplifies their skills is the fact that they're able to go from fast sections to groovier sections and eventually into like a very sort of open chorus without it seeming forced. It's not abrupt, and I find that really impressive, especially with a band like this where it's very riff heavy, and sometimes transitioning from one section to the next can be a bit awkward, but this band does that differently in the sense that it's very clean, it's very deliberate. And then to top it all off, for the ending of this track, it goes into almost like a straight up like deathcore thing where we have our chuggy breakdowns with like fast double kick pedals, which caught me a bit off guard. And it was another one of those moments where I was like, man, this band clearly could stand up toe to toe with any other sort of modern day metal band that exists out there. Next, we look at the track The Way Back Home, which starts off a bit slower, creating a bit of a breather, which I think is really important for albums that are of this intensity and brutality. And that is that you give sort of a breathing room, a bit of like a reprise from all the insanity. Doing so, it creates more impact. It makes the heavier section seem heavier and more in your face, which I think is very important. Dynamics are good. What is also great about this track as well is that the breakdown style chorus, which I think worked really well. It had a lot of like aggression to it, and also reminded me a bit of a break. And also it reminded me of a breakdown from August Burns' Red track. I think it was Empire. So that's a big plus for me as well. I'm a big August Burns Red fan. And the only real downside to this track was I thought the way they ended the track was a bit meh, because they went for their sort of like their more weaker, quieter part that was at the start of the track, and I felt like this song could have gotten heavier for its outro, but that's just me. Now, this album pretty much continues with the whole brutal assault, but then we get to sort of the closing 2 tracks, and specifically the one Icarus Falling, which is a very interesting track because it starts off with a piano section, which, like in The Way Back Home, it gives us a breather. It creates dynamic. It creates this sort of pull and push motion, which is important. And especially in this section, it kind of acts as sort of like this beginning to this sort of 2-part epic that is the last 2 tracks. Then eventually we have guitars that come in and layer over the piano, which I thought was done really well. It also reminded me a bit of like the track Orion from Master of Puppets, with this sort of instrumental section, which then eventually leads into more heaviness. But they do bring back the piano as well as a layering piece, which I'm quite happy about. But then after that, the album ends. Now, to talk about the structure of the album, I thought it was pretty substantial. It was pretty solid. Although I may have wished that the opening track, Kill Shot, maybe would have been put in the album a bit later in the album. Might have been put in later. So overall, I thought the structure was pretty solid. It was aggressive. So overall, I thought the structure of the album was pretty solid. However, I do feel that maybe if Kill Shot was more centered in the album, I think it would have fit just a little bit better. Because with Kill Shot starting off the album at like 110%, everything else sort of just fell a bit short of that like intensity level. So if Kill Shot was maybe moved to the more of like the center, I think it would have been like a lot more of like a rising and then falling, sort of like a story plot. But besides that, I don't really have any huge issues with the structure, to be honest. Now moving to my favorite part is the mix. Overall, it was a great mix. It was heavy, it was brutal. It had pretty much everything you could ask for from a modern day death metal album. My only gripe really was that I thought the guitars had a bit too much of a low end boost, specifically maybe around 200 hertz. And it was creating that sort of wah-wah sort of effect. I don't know if that was intentional, but I just felt like maybe if you dipped it a bit at 200, it could have brightened the guitars up and they would have been more prominent in the mix. And overall, I thought the mix was just quite dark. So maybe boosting the top end a little bit might have added a bit more. I don't know, but those are just my thoughts on the mix. But overall, the mix, it was a good mix. It was heavy, it was brutal. The drums were sounding amazing and the vocals were on point. It's absolutely on point. But now that brings me to the end and of course the verdict. So the verdict for me is that this album was a solid album, competing with anything that any modern day band can produce. And it also just shows that yeah, you can teach an old dog new tricks, and that we shouldn't disregard like bands that are like that have been in the game for this long, because this album really shows that yeah, no, they can still pull out all the stops. So with that in mind, I'm gonna give this album an 8 out of 10. And I would like to hear your guys' opinion on this album. Did you like it? Did you not? And of course, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe to my channel to keep up to date with all my content. And with all that said, I'll see you guys on the next video. Bye.